Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13 through chapter 17, verse 9. When Jesus came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They answered, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "You are blessed, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will have been released in heaven." Then he instructed his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and experts in law, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid, Lord, this must not happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, because you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man's." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wants to become my follower, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what does it benefit a person if he gains the whole world, but forfeits his life? Or what can a person give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, there are some standing here who will not experience death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them privately up a high mountain. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Then Moses and Elijah also appeared before them, talking with him. So Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you want, I will make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my one dear Son, in whom I take great delight. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they were overwhelmed with fear, and threw themselves down with their faces to the ground. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Do not be afraid." When they looked up, all they saw was Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Do not tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." Yeah, so you have here Jesus talking about his identity, and asking the disciples who people say that he is. And some say John the Baptist, or goodness, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But Peter confessed that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. Yeah. Yeah, and then you have bits there like that are popular to use by the Catholic Church there of tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will have been released in heaven. Yeah, supposing by the Catholic Church to give Peter great authority. But I guess just from a point of view of papal infallibility, after this, I mean, Peter denies Christ 3 times, and subsequently to that, after Jesus' death and resurrection, during the period of the Acts, rather than sit with the Gentile believers, he separated himself and only sat with the Jewish believers out of some type of peer pressure-esque situation, and Paul had to call him out on it. So, yeah, and I've heard it said that this rock here inferred is Jesus and not Peter. Let me see what Guzik has to say. I say to you that you are Peter. This was not only recognition of Peter's more Roman name, it was also a promise of God's work in Peter. The name Peter means rock. Though perhaps unlikely, Peter was a rock and would become a rock. God was and would transform his naturally extreme character into something solid and reliable. On this rock I will build my church. The words "this rock" have been the source of much controversy. It is best to see them as referring to either Jesus himself or as referring to Peter's confession of who Jesus is. Peter, by his own testimony, did not see himself as the rock on which the church was founded. He wrote that we are living stones, but Jesus is the cornerstone. We could say that Peter was the first believer, that he was the first rock among many rocks. Peter said as much in 1 Peter 2, 4-5, coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. I will build my church. This is the first use of the word church in the New Testament, or the Bible for that matter. Using the ancient Greek word ekklesia, significantly, this was well before the beginning of what we normally think of as the church on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. The ancient Greek word ekklesia was not primarily a religious word at all. It just meant group, or called out group. In describing the latter group of his followers and disciples, Jesus deliberately chose a word without a distinctly religious meaning. Furthermore, this statement of Jesus was a clear claim of ownership. My church. The church belongs to Jesus. This was also a claim to deity. What is striking is the boldness of Jesus' description of it as my community rather than God's. And the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Jesus also offered a promise that the forces of death and darkness can't prevail against or conquer the church. This is a valuable promise in dark or discouraging times for the church. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. This idea of Peter holding the keys of the kingdom of heaven has captured the imagination and theology of many Christians throughout the centuries. In artistic representation, Peter is almost always shown with keys. Some people think that this means that Peter has the authority to admit people to heaven or to keep people out of heaven. This is the basis for the popular image of Peter at the pearly gates of heaven, allowing people to enter or turning them away. Some people think that it also means that Peter was the first pope, and that his supposed successors have the keys that were first given to Peter. Indeed, the papal insignia of the Roman Catholic Church is made up of two prominent keys crossed together. There is no doubt that Peter had a special place among all the disciples, and that he had some special privileges. Yet there is no biblical argument whatsoever that Peter's privilege or authority was passed on. To put it one way, one might say that Jesus gave Peter the keys, but didn't give him the authority to pass them on to future generations. And there is not a whisper in the Scriptures that Peter's authority was to be passed on. The idea that apostolic authority comes from Jesus, who gave it to Peter, who set his hands on the heads of approved and ordained men, who in turn set their hands on the heads of approved and ordained men, and so on through the generations until today, is nonsense. It is exactly what Spurgeon said. It was the laying of empty hands on empty heads. Yeah. I was reading through 2,000 Years of Christ's Power, a book on church history, and it put forward this theory that this succession idea became important to the early church because of the rise of cults, essentially, of like Gnosticism and their supposed claims of special knowledge that was passed on to them by the disciples that, surprise, surprise, significantly altered the content of Scripture, the message of Scripture. So one of the defenses that was offered was that these Gnostics had no line of succession. That is, that there was no way that they could have gone back to the apostles, and they themselves, like churches that were founded by the apostles, had more connection to the apostles than these Gnostic heretics, essentially, that were cropping up. And so this idea of succession became more important to the early church. Perhaps too important. But I think the idea of having this basis for what you believe is important. So, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. The power for binding and loosing is something that the Jewish rabbis of that day used. They bound or loosed an individual in the application of a particular point of the law. Jesus' promise is that Peter and the other apostles would be able to set the boundaries authoritatively for the new covenant community. This was the authority given to the apostles and prophets to build a foundation. Yeah. I'm reminded of the admonition to the Gentiles of the early church not to engage in sexual immorality and not to eat meat with the blood in it or sacrifice to idols. As their rabbi, Jesus did this binding and loosing for his own disciples. Without using the same words, this is what Jesus did when he allowed them to take the grains of wheat in the field. Significantly, when it came time to understanding the dietary laws of the Old Covenant in light of the new work of Jesus, God spoke to Peter first. He and the other apostles, guided by the Spirit of God, would bind and loose Christians regarding such parts of the Old Covenant. In a lesser, secondary sense, this power is with the church today. Today, the Lord continues to back up the teaching and acts of his sent servants, those Peters who are pieces of the one rock. The judgments of his church, when rightly administered, have his sanction so as to make them valid. The words of his sent servants, spoken in his name, shall be confirmed of the Lord, and shall not be, either as to promise or threatening, a mere piece of rhetoric. Yeah, then Jesus prophesies his death, and then Peter rebukes the Lord. Peter did it privately, took him aside, yet was confident enough to tell Jesus that he was wrong to consider going to Jerusalem to be killed. "Get behind me, Satan." This was a strong rebuke from Jesus, yet entirely appropriate. Though a moment before Peter spoke as a messenger of God, he then spoke as a messenger of Satan. Jesus knew there was a satanic purpose in discouraging him from his ministry on the cross. Peter's rebuke of Jesus is an evidence of the leaven mentioned in Matthew 16:6. With his mind on the things of men, Peter only saw the Messiah as the embodiment of power and strength, instead of as a suffering servant. Because Peter couldn't handle a suffering Messiah, he rebuked Jesus. Yeah, he allowed this idea of the conquering Messiah to pervade his thoughts of the Messiah. "Let him deny himself, if anyone desires to come after me, and take up his cross." It is bad enough for the disciples to hear that Jesus would suffer, be rejected, and die on a cross. Now Jesus told them that they must do the same thing. Deny himself and take up his cross. Everyone knew what Jesus meant when he said this. Everyone knew that the cross was an unrelenting instrument of death. The cross had no other purpose. In these 20 centuries after Jesus, we have done a pretty good job in sanitizing and ritualizing the cross. Yet Jesus said something much like this: "Walk down death road daily and follow me." Taking up your cross wasn't a journey. It was a one-way trip. There was no return ticket. It was never a round trip. Yeah, period. Cross-bearing does not refer to some irritation in life. Rather, it involves the way of the cross. The picture is of a man already condemned, required to carry his cross on the way to the place of execution, as Jesus was required to do. Yeah. Take up this instrument of torture, essentially. That was so terrible that historians just referred to it as the extreme punishment. "Whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." We must follow Jesus this way because it is the only way that we will ever find life. It sounds strange to say, you will never live until you first walk to your death with Jesus, but that is the idea. You can't gain resurrection life without dying first. You don't lose a seed when you plant it, though it seems dead and buried. Instead, you set the seed free to be what it was always intended to be. Yeah, but if you just treasure the seed as it is, it won't ever grow into a plant. Yeah, and then you have this piece here, which is sometimes difficult and misused in its intent here of, "Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Yeah. And this is not some failed prophecy of Jesus. What immediately happens next is this transfiguration on the Mount, where they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Yeah, and on that Mount of Transfiguration, you have Moses and Elijah, the veritable law in Moses and the prophets and Elijah represented, confirming Jesus' ministry. We may also say that Moses and Elijah represent those who are caught up to God. More specifically, Moses represents those who die and go to glory, and Elijah represents those who are caught up to heaven without death. Talking with him, Luke 9:31 tells us the theme of their conversation. They spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. They spoke of the upcoming work of the cross and presumably of the resurrection to follow. Yeah, and then you have God himself, the Father, confirming Jesus. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. The Father from heaven rebuked Peter's attempt to put Jesus on an equal footing with Moses and Elijah, and while he was still speaking, hear him. If we should listen to anyone, we should listen to Jesus. One would think that a voice from heaven would say, listen to me. But the Father said, hear him. Everything points us to Jesus. From Spurgeon here, if Peter be our master, let us call him so. If Calvin be our master, let us call him so. And if Wesley be our master, let us call him so. But if we be disciples of Jesus, then let us follow Jesus, and follow him with other men only so far as we perceive they followed Christ. Anyhow, carrying on here. Psalm chapter 21, verses 1 through 13. O Lord, the King rejoices in the strength you give. He takes great delight in the deliverance you provide. You grant him his heart's desire. You do not refuse his request. For you bring him rich blessings. You place a golden crown on his head. He asked you to sustain his life, and you have granted him long life and an enduring dynasty. Your deliverance brings him great honor. You give him majestic splendor. For you grant him lasting blessings. You give him great joy by allowing him into your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord, and because of the sovereign Lord's faithfulness, he is not upended. You prevail over all your enemies. Your power is too great for those who hate you. You burn them up like a fiery furnace when you appear. The Lord angrily devours them. The fire consumes them. You destroy their offspring from the earth, their descendants from among the human race. Yes, they intend to do you harm. They dream up a scheme, but they do not succeed. For you make them retreat when you shoot your arrows at them. Rise up, O Lord, in strength. We will sing and praise your power. Yeah. Yeah, this king takes delight in the strength of the Lord and in his providence, sustaining his life, delivering him great honor, majestic splendor, lasting blessings, security, power over his enemies. Yeah. And finally, Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. My child, be attentive to my wisdom. Pay close attention to my understanding, in order to safeguard discretion, and that your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her seductive words are smoother than olive oil. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword, Her feet go down to death, her steps lead straight to the grave. Lest she should make level the path leading to life, her paths are unstable, but she does not know it. Yeah. This adulterous woman here is often referred to in Proverbs as essentially being a trap. That is it might seem like a good, attractive idea to engage in sexual immorality with her, but that's the way of death. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. There's this contrast to the start of the matter. Lips drip honey, and seductive words, smoother than olive oil. But contrasted with the end of it, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Yeah. I think this is another shining example of why it's a bad idea to follow our impulses, follow our heart, because there's a path that seems right at the time, that seems good and attractive at the time, but eventually ends up in your death. And that path of hedonistic self-satisfaction is an unstable path. But this adulterous woman doesn't even realize that it is unstable. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.